So an interesting discussion came up in one of my discords this morning, basically asking the question is whether Fyendal Spring Tunic, this lovely piece of work that gives you one free resource every 3 turns and a block, should be banned. And I'm interested in that debate for sure. But one of the things I'm kind of more interested in is not the question of whether it should be banned, but the question of whether it will be banned, right? And the thing that I came up with in response to the conversation, and the thing I thought I'd focus on right now, is asking the question as whether it will be banned based on a simple metric, which is, if we think Tunic is going to be banned, then it will not be power crept by other legendaries. If we think that Tunic isn't going to be banned, then it will get power crept by other legendaries, right? That's a simple metric, right? So if we think they're going to ban Tunic, then they probably have kept printing cards that aren't necessarily just going to drive Tunic out of the meta. And if we think they aren't going to ban Tunic, then there might be more of a pattern where they have printed cards that can push Tunic out of the meta. So let's just have a look at the cards that are available to us, how many resources they get. So obviously the common equipments can potentially give you more resources than Tunic, but usually the primary difference between them and the legendaries is the repeatability, right? So there's lots of arguments as to whether something like Spellfire Cloak or Blossom of Spring are better than Tunic, and in some ways they are, and in Blitz they are, and that's kind of part of the design of them that is beneficial, is the fact that they are very cheap, but they are limited, which means they work in Blitz very well. So then let's turn our attention to other cards. So we've got a distinction here. Some legendaries are more leaning into blocking versus leaning into resource generation, so it's hard to judge. Blazing Yori is very, very niche. Skeleta is actually better than Tunic in terms of resource generation, because it gives you as many resources as you need on the one turn. So that's kind of why it was banned. It's better. Celestial Kimono theoretically is better, but it kind of makes you jump through hoops. Because remember that it can trigger once per turn on your turn and your opponent's turn, but based on the way that Ward works, it's more likely to work on your opponent's turn. So then there is the question as to what are you going to do with those resources? And, the indications we're getting right now is that the new Illusionist Prism, because of her lower health, is going to play a bit more in her opponent's turn, which means maybe the Ward triggers giving you resources will be more relevant. Courage, obviously, again, it gives you the resources when you need them, not a constant drip, so it is kind of slightly different. Seismic Surge is just how many resources do you want? Can you set it up? This is very specific to a mirror match. This is just incredibly defensive. This is kind of better, but requires more setup. It can give you more resources, and it can be activated every turn if you need it. But in practice, it doesn't work to give as many resources, because really what we're looking at in terms of a pattern with Tunic is that it gives you one resource that you can bank and then use exactly when you need it. Whereas this is actually better for playing bigger cards, because you're going to have already pitched. Your ideal scenario with this is pitching 1 red to play a 1-cost attack, and then pitching another red to play a 2-cost attack, right? And none of the decks that currently... Dromai does this, but Dromai needs this to make Ash. The other Draconic hero, Phi, doesn't really drive a 1-cost, 2-cost attack pattern. They drive just, here's my hand, everything costs 0. And they actually like Tunic more because the only 1-cost card they play is Art of War, which is enabled very well by having one free resource that you can have. This drains resources. This gives resources to play attack reactions. I've kind of had a massive rant about this already, so I don't really want to go back into it again, but the summary of this is not enough attack reactions that work with cards that generate silver have a cost associated with them for this card to actually make sense from a design perspective. So it's not really better than Tunic. However, I will say that when cards come out that do work better with cards that generate silver, then this becomes something you could potentially trigger every turn, and that does give it more value than Tunic. But the drawback is the opportunity cost of not spending that silver to rebuild your boots or your helmet. I think this probably ranks above helmet, but probably below boots. The boots that go again is so good. This is a free resource every turn. It does cost a free resource every turn. And it has that drawback of Seismic Surge trigger windows, so you can't necessarily guarantee that it's better. But also, this was printed at the same time as Tunic, so this is an evidence of power creep. It's kind of an important point to make that when we talk about power creeping Tunic, we really need to talk about things printed after, say, around and after, I would say, Tales of Aria. Most TCGs work on a sort of 2-year design advance, or at least roughly 2 years. So the idea that something like tectonic plating is going to power creep Tunic isn't really a good discussion. But then when you start looking at stuff like Flamescale Furnace, Redback Shroud, Trench of Sunken Treasures, then we start to see more of an illumination of that discussion. So Vestige of Soul could have been on the borderline. It is very good, but you know, the limitations of have to put a card into Soul, and then you have to pitch a light card as well, is you know, this is good for playing expensive things with an enabler. And we'll see when the new Prism cards come out, but if there's an easy way to charge your Soul at the start of a turn, like a new Genesis effect or something like that, then Vestige of Soul's value goes up massively. Some people even speculating the new Prism will have a Genesis-like effect just to generate Spectral Shields, because she seems to really need them. Really, the main ones, I think, to look at: Flamescale Furnace. Does it power creep Tunic? Yes, but with weird limitations. I would say it doesn't power creep Tunic because of its limitations. Trench of Sunken Treasure costs you a card, so it doesn't power creep Tunic. Redback Shroud doesn't power creep Tunic because of the cost of a silver. The ability to... This ability, the fact that this triggers every turn, is a power creep, but the fact that it costs 2 silver isn't. So when I look at something like Trench of Sunken Treasure, when I look at Redback Shroud, I don't actually see clear evidence that Tunic is being power crept. Yes, they can trigger every turn, but the cost associated with them is higher than the cost of waiting 2 turns to get your free resource, right? They also don't... I mean, this blocks for more, but the other two have... You know, I guess that has Battle Worn, but this has Blade Break. So the blocking is kind of more to be class dependent rather than necessarily power creep dependent. I think it is just the resource generation, and I would say that based on, you know, the abilities on both of these cards, I don't feel like they're power creep Tunic, and that kind of draws a straight line for me. If Tunic is being power crept, it's a simple logical preposition. If it is being power crept, then the idea is to replace it in the meta by giving you stronger alternatives that also tie into class synergy. However, if the class synergy cards that you're being given are not better than Tunic, they're just different, but they maintain the same power level. And I think all 3 of these cards maintain the same power level, right? Because the single thing that they have here is they have an alternative cost that also takes resources. This requires you to have played a card. This requires you to have a card face down in your arsenal and to get rid of it. And this requires you to spend silver and has a very, very limited targeting window, right? Whereas the other 2 have very broad targeting windows. This is a very, very specific targeting window. And then Vestige of Soul, of course, requires a lot of setup as well. So, and then if you want to go back, you can look at the fact that Technical Foundry Heart requires both a resource and also mills you 2 cards, and Dash is a deck that mills out. So every other resource cost effectiveness card has a board state requirement, a trigger requirement, and usually a card in hand or played card requirement, right? Which Tunic doesn't have, it just has a time requirement. So the fact is, I would say that none of these other legendaries have power crept Tunic. And if we look at the trajectory of power creep, if they were power creeping Tunic, Tunic would not be banned. If it's not being power crept, then the goal is to ban Tunic. And all they are waiting for is for every class to have an alternative to Tunic that also generates resources, right? I think that's all they're waiting for, is an alternative Tunic generation method, or, to be fair, if the class doesn't need resources, something like Carrion Husk, which is good enough to replace Tunic, even if you had something that generated resources, right? And also Shadow Runeblade does have Aether Ironweave, which is good enough, because it gives you 2 resources at just the right time, and we saw that in chain decks before. Brute doesn't. I mean, Brute has Bark Skin, but I wouldn't count that. Brute doesn't have a consistent way, but Brute is a confused, neglected class anyway. So in terms of classes that have a good resource option available to them, Illusionist is covered, Warrior is covered, Assassin is covered, Wizard is not. So Wizard hasn't got anything except for the mirror, but it does have this weird mirror thing, so they might decide it doesn't need it. Guardian is covered, Mech is covered, Ranger is covered now. Illusionist is covered by both of these. So if we think about our lovely class list, which I'm sure we have here somewhere, choose a class, right? So Adjudicator goes, yep. Assassin covered, Brute no, but weird. Guardian yes, Illusionist yes, Mechanologist yes. Ninja, no, but questionable whether it would break the class, given how much value it gets already out of the Barkbone cross straps, the -2 on one specific turn. So maybe more resources. But I think Ninja might get something soon. Ranger, yes. Runeblade, no, but it got banned, so there might be something else in the works. Warrior, yes. Wizard, no. So you'll see most of the classes are covered by a resource option that isn't Tunic, but they do require some loops. But think about what you prefer. Would you like one powerful generic? This is just a thought to take away because this is the end of the video. Would you like one powerful generic, gives you 1 resource every 3 turns, that slots into all of your decks but costs £200? Or would you like each class having 3 different options, maybe 1 legendary, 2 majestics, that all support a different playstyle and reward you for leaning heavily into that playstyle? The first one is good for me as someone who's established, because I have a Spring Tunic, or 2, they're around here somewhere. The second one is infinitely better for new players, because they can get the entry option into their class. Like, if you are an Illusionist player and Ward becomes the way things play, you can start with Celestial Kimono, and it might turn out that for Dromai and both Dromai and Prism, Flamescale Furnish and Vestige of Soul are 10 points higher or something like that in terms of matchups and things like that. But you still have this, and it's still available for £3, right? So that is infinitely better. And it really should go £3, max £80, and then not have this upper ceiling of £230 at the top, right? It really should go on that trajectory. The idea that you need to progress as a FAB player, you go like £3, okay, £80. How much is this going to be when Brazil and Japan get massively into the game? Is it going to go up to 250? So that's it. The final takeaway thought I just want to leave with you is that there are 8 legendaries in Dusk to Dawn. Personally, I am predicting a Tunic reprint. I'm expecting them to reprint Tunic. I think the price has gone too high. I don't think they're ready to ban it yet. So I'm expecting them will reprint Tunic. An alternative, which would be amazing, is if there were just crazy, fun, interesting, resource-focused legendaries for every class on this list that's missing something, and a replacement Tunic, and then they announce the set, they give everyone these amazing new legendaries and majestics that all do fantastic things to give people resources by playing into their class fantasy, and then they ban Tunic, and that's the announcement, right? That would be amazing too. So do I think Tunic is going to get banned? I 100% do, actually, just based on the way that it's not being power crept. I fully expect it to get banned. I think they are just laying the foundation so that everyone has something to fall back on, and everyone has something that they can play that's a legendary. I don't think they want any class to stop playing Tunic and have to play a common or something subpar. So I think that they definitely want to get everyone set up in such a way that they don't feel like their deck is suddenly infinitely worse once Tunic is banned. But I do expect that Tunic will be banned.